Now we have a guest in the studio. He is our president. Okay. And before we accord the right honors and, for example, the guard of honor and all for the president, City has the day's proverb.
Okay. The locust flew away, but it left hardship. That's a proverb from Somalia.
The locust flew away, but it left
hardship. Of course, we were of the view that it took some of those hardships to Kenya.
I don't know whether, City, you are trying to play a political game, because I am looking at the papers today. And I see two similar headlines. The proverb says, the locust? Say.
The locust flew away, but it left hardship.
Give us time to clean up Uhuru mess, pleads Ruto.
You know what this guy is doing?
Uhuru ruined the economy, says Ruto, as he
anything.
pleads for more time. The locust flew away.
City, I've warned you. Don't say anything.
About?
Thank you very much. Carry on.
You know?
No,
Okay. CNT has spoken.
The locust flew away. Eric Theuri is the president of the Law Society of Kenya. He's here with us in the studio. Eric, good morning.
Morning.
How you doing?
I'm good.
That proverb by City, what comes to mind when you hear it? How do you interpret the proverb? It's a Somali proverb.
I'm still digesting. You know, Somalis are not synonymous with proverbs.
Monsieur El Presidente. Every African country, I mean, the nations of the world, yes, but we're in Africa. Believe me, have proverbs.
All of them.
All.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a deep proverb. I mean, if you look at it in the context of what we're going on, yeah, it's quite deep.
The president is a thinking man, unlike you, Eric.
This president, unlike you. All presidents in the country,
yes,
are thinking the same way. Yes.
You think?
Oh, yes.
Past and present.
Past and present.
Why don't we just throw in the future while we're at it?
Now, the Law Society of Kenya came out guns blazing on Thursday. And this is after action by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions regarding some ongoing cases before court, touching on corruption, particularly when the Director of Public Prosecutions went to court and applied to drop charges in a case where former officers, senior managers of the Kenya Power and Lighting Company were in court, and another case where the former governor of Samburu County and others were also in court. Although later he came and said he's going to continue with the Samburu case, the Law Society of Kenya was saying, we need to know why. And you give an ultimatum to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Just bring us up to speed. What was it? Where were your nostrils flaring, Eric?
You know, the issue really was what you call the integrity of an institution. Before a case is instituted, it goes through a certain process. The first process is the investigations carried out we presume, by extremely competent and professional police officers. They investigate, they know what the law says, they gather the evidence, and they find that the evidence they have gathered discloses an offense that is known within the laws of our country. Then they present that file to the DPP. The DPP then independently reviews the evidence, and where there are gaps, he points out the gaps to them and tells them, fill these gaps. And after they have done that, or if there are no gaps and he is satisfied that the evidence discloses an offense, then they charge you. Now, what is critical and what we would want people to understand is that at the point where the DPP makes a determination to charge you, that evidence, if unchallenged, should be able to secure a conviction. So it's evidence we call prima facie. On the face of it, without an explanation, it shows that someone committed an offense. Now, assuming that that is the case, then how do you withdraw a case that has been in court perhaps for 3, 4, 5 years? That is the question. Yeah. So that it is either that the case in the first place ought not to have been there, or in the alternative, and considering that some of those suspects were had been nominated for cabinet secretaries, you're just withdrawing the cases so that they can go through the
Nomination
vetting
process.
The nomination process. Yeah.
Can we camp out in that 4 or 5 years ago for a minute? So when this case was brought to court, Eric, the assumption would be that the office of the DPP had met the threshold of evidentiary demand, that whatever the list of counts were, that they had done the due diligence and they had done the homework, and then it was presented to court for these charges then to be leveled against individuals. Now, we have seen cases whereby the court would say, well, this evidence is not sufficient, take this thing away, forget about it, let's move on, right? In this case, the court was then accepting of the evidence that was brought, accepting of through which now the process of charging actually took place. At that point, if it was not sufficient, could the court have said, or would the court have said, actually, this does not meet the mark, give us something else to deal with? Could that have happened at the time if it was not sufficient, or how would that have worked exactly?
No, we don't have a sort of a pre-trial process where the court would have to look at the evidence first before confirming a charge. It's different if you look at maybe the ICC. They go through some sort of pre-trial process, go through the evidence and confirm that it discloses a reasonable offense, and then they charge. Other countries also have that sort of mechanism.
Right.
But in Kenya, we do not have that. So that responsibility is vested upon the DPP.
Beautiful.
And it's actually a constitutional requirement
Yeah.
for him, because you have to remember that our 2010 constitution was crafted upon the various challenges that we faced during the repressive regime of the ESIS.
Okay.
And in those, and one of the things that characterized that regime was the use of criminal process to harass and rather persecute those that had contrary opinions to the government of the day.
Okay.
So the constitutional requirement that the DPP then is this safeguard. The police will investigate, but the DPP is the safeguard. Is the one who is actually safeguarding the public interest to ensure that no case is brought to court when it is to serve an ulterior purpose.
So based on that then, so we can also say that the trust, whether it is of the judiciary or of the people of Kenya, is that by the time the ODPP is bringing a case to court, that it is watertight, and that you can trust that they've done the due diligence before this case is presented.
Yes, that actually is the position, and you will find that there are a few cases where suspects have tried to challenge the decision by the DPP to charge, and the courts have always been consistent that during the criminal trial, the person still enjoys the presumption of innocence until the case is heard and determined, and there are sufficient safeguards within the criminal trial process to ensure that an innocent person does not go to jail or is not held to account for an offense he did not commit. So the reason why the courts then have taken that position is because they look at the constitutional architecture and they know that the DPP is there yeah, to safeguard public interest. And they make the presumption that by the time he is presenting the case to court, there is watertight. So you will find that there are very few instances where the court will intervene. And in those, then the court will be able to look at it and say that this prosecution is brought because of other ulterior motives. But if you just bring in, for example, gaps that, this evidence is not enough, those kind of things, the court will tell you, I mean, when you go to trial, you should be able to challenge where, you're saying there is insufficiency of evidence. So that you have to prove that perhaps this prosecution in itself is intended to serve ulterior purposes for the court to agree. Now, the situation that we find ourselves in at this particular juncture is that the DPP is taking certain actions, which then raises questions as to the credibility of his office and of the investigative agencies. So suppose, and this is what I invite you to start considering, suppose that the DPP, by the time he filed those cases, he knew that the evidence is not enough, or that there is a probability that these guys whom I'm taking to court did not commit the offenses that they committed.
Yeah.
And you have to remember how these people used to be arrested.
Yep.
Yeah. What infamously came to be known as Kamata Kamata Friday.
Yep.
Yeah. That it got to a point where when you are a top civil servant, you had to carry an extra jacket and sweater because, come Friday,
You'll be picked up anywhere.
you could be picked up anywhere. And then so you need to be sufficiently dressed to be able to survive the night in the event that you are caught. Now, when you look at all that, and then it is those cases that then are being withdrawn, what kind of an injustice did we carry out on the Kenyan people? And so that then brings into question, tomorrow then, if a case is instituted, would we believe that it is being instituted for the right purposes?
Or all the other present cases that are still ongoing, that haven't been concluded, can we trust that there is sufficient evidence or that they are actually going through fair process in their prosecution? Is it allowed in law, Eric, for the DPP to go to court with and still be collecting more evidence as the case is ongoing? For example, so he has been presented a file by the DCI or the EACC or whichever investigating agency. He looks at the file and he finds, like you said, prima facie case, goes to court. But he can still say, but there's still more evidence that I'm looking for. The investigations often continue beyond the stage of initiation of a charge. But at the point of initiation, there ought to be enough evidence. There might be a situation, perhaps, let us say that where there is some sort of unholy alliance between the police and the DPP, where, you present evidence, and then I tell you, having reviewed it, I think that it is not enough, and I need you to check ABCD, and then someone tells you, no, I just allow me to charge, allow me to charge, because the trial will not take place immediately. By the time we finish, I would have filled up those gaps, and then we can continue with the case. So there might be a situation where if there is what you call an unholy alliance between the police and the DPP, that those kind of things can happen, which is some sort of, for lack of a better word, a very kienyeji way of operating, which is completely outside the law. So you may want to say that might be a situation that would happen, but the ideal is that you charge on the basis of the information, and that information discloses a reasonable charge. But as the case continues, investigations are carried out, continue to be carried out, and in some instance, even information that
what we call exculpatory evidence can come up and exculpatory in the sense that it points to the innocence. It's evidence that then shows that you are innocent of a crime. Yeah, so
This thing is very good.
no, you said every tribe has its own whatever.
Yes, it's compulsory. So the tribe that this gentleman is president of can compulsory you.
Yeah.
At the point of trial, let's look at the office of the DPP and accord it goodwill. Okay, in this particular case, let's just look at it and say, all right, so let's assume that they are actually doing the best to the best of their ability and the best of intentions. So they go to court, and here you say, you and the investigating agency, you agree, all right, so I will need X extra information or extra evidence as the case proceeds, so that then we can basically tighten all the loose ends. We can preempt what the defense would bring. We'll have the kind of evidence, right, but let's take them to court because we have sufficient stuff that shows something happened here. But in between, the goodwill between the ODPP and the investigating agency collapses. So now the investigating agency decides, I am not going to be following everything that you asked me to do. I have other things that I want to focus on. In this particular case, the DPP basically is complaining, I have written to the DCI 4 times asking for this piece of evidence. They have not provided me with this piece of evidence, so that's why my hands are tied. I cannot investigate myself, and I expected this piece of evidence to be the one that goes ahead to solidify my case. With that, I don't have confidence that this case can continue. Is that not a possibility?
It is a possibility, and I in my own assessment of the situation that we are facing, that could actually be the case. I mean, we know that there has been extremely frosty relationships between the former DCI, Mr. Kinoti, and the DPP. We know that Mr. Kinoti has attempted severally to charge people without getting the consent of the DPP. So we know that friction. We know that there have been cases that have been taken to the DPP, and the DPP has declined to charge on the basis that they do not meet the threshold. And that has resulted in significant pressure from the DCI to the DPP. We know of the so many cases that have been filed in the Constitutional Division. I remember my predecessor had to also go to court to challenge certain very corrosive attempts by the DCI, former DCI, Mr. Kinoti, to interfere with the office of the DPP. So we are alive to all those issues. And I think that really points to the kind of situation that we are in, that there's been lack of hygiene in the criminal justice chain. And then so we need to start somewhere. And the place that we start is at the door of the DPP, because he is the one constitutionally who is supposed to ensure that all of us are safe. And this is really a question of our own safety. And let me say this, so that you can begin to comprehend the kind of situation that we are in as a country. Prison population, the highest number of people who are in prison are serving a sentence of below 3 years. It's more than about 60% of the population in prison. About 30%, and I say this very loosely, it might be 30, it might be slightly more, of the population that is in prison are serving a sentence of below 1 year. So what does that tell you? It tells you that those are petty offenders.
Yeah.
Those are offenders that are probably unrepresented, and that's why they are in jail. So there is a possibility that there are a lot of people who are in jail who are not supposed to be in jail. So in a sense, if then we are able probably to go back, we might find that there are so many cases that have been presented by the police to the courts, and those people have been convicted, but there's been no basis to take them to the police station, to courts. Maybe they were intended to serve other ulterior purposes, as this scenario is beginning to show us. So you know, and then that's the question that I was asking. How then do we trust our police that when they arrest someone and they actually take that person to court, that person actually deserves to be taken?
Sufficient.
Yeah, that's really the crisis that we are facing as a country, and it's not an idle inquiry that we are making, but we need to start somewhere. We start with at the door of the DPP, because he is the one who is supposed to be our shield.
And if he doesn't play that role sufficiently, then
yes,
he has allowed us to be exposed. He's exposed us.
Actually, now the prosecution has changed from prosecution to persecution.
Wow. Let's take a break. Yes, let's take a break at this point. It's 7:30. Eric Theuri is the president of the Law Society of Kenya. He's here with us today, talking about why the LSK is not happy with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution when it drops some certain high-level corruption cases without explanation. And you sought sufficient explanation from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. You'll tell us whether you've received any communication from the ODPP, and also what you're going to do about it next.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
City, you had a question for Eric.
I did. Mr. President, something I want you to explain to me, because I find it puzzling. I found it puzzling for the longest time. You say that our laws stipulate that one is innocent until proven guilty. So why do we have a remand facility where people who are arrested simply go there, and some seem to actually make a permanent residence there, and they're there for the longest time? How does this innocent until proven guilty thing work?
It's a presumption. It's a presumption of innocence. It's a presumption because you haven't gone through the criminal process yet.
Yes.
But there's been some investigation which has shown in prima facie that you are, there's a probable case against you. So, there are so many reasons that then, of course, because you enjoy the presumption of innocence, then you have the right to be admitted to bail or bond so that you can continue with your own activities as you go through the criminal trial process. And that's the reason why you have a remand home, so that for those that are unable to post bail, then there's somewhere where you can hold them. Now, if there are also other reasons why you can also be denied bail. You may have the ability to pay, but maybe it is not safe for you to be released because sometimes of the nature of the offense and the sentiment of the community from which you're coming from. Perhaps there is a probability that you will interfere with the witnesses. So there are so many reasons that go against your right to bail. But remember, constitutionally, every person is entitled to bail. And you see, when the 2010 Constitution came, murder was not bailable. Yeah, but eventually people interpreted it and said the Constitution has said everyone has a right to bail and bond. So even if you are charged for murder, you're still entitled to get bond.
You know, you've actually confounded my puzzlement.
Because of why?
Yeah, because if I'm going with the figures that you've mentioned, you said they're anecdotal. There's 60% thrown in people who are in jail, and the term is under 3 years, and there's another 30% under 1 year. My guess is that the bulk of these people are not old like myself.
Yes, but you know there's a difference, because we are talking of people who are already serving a sentence, who are in jail.
I agree completely.
Yes,
In
but
fact,
of course,
Yeah.
that's true also, that majority of the people are in their productive
yes.
years.
When you consider that someone is arrested and there is an investigation, the very person who is conducting the investigation, the person who was responsible for your arrest, it seems to be like a skewed shift of power just to one particular sector. Because these fellows have the power to hold you, detain you, and decide even before what it is that you're going to be guilty of before you're even taken to court. And yet, the person who's been arrested has one recourse. It's called bail. One. And if these people are young, and many of them are in that position, this very thing that the Constitution magnanimously offers them, they can't afford. They're not in a position to take advantage of. Are there other avenues that such individuals can actually seek redress and look for ways of ensuring that they enjoy this freedom that the Constitution actually affords them?
You know, there's a whole policy on bail and bond, and one of the things that it looks at are all those issues.
Do they really?
Yes, they do, and in certain instances, the court, as time goes by, keeps on gradually reducing your bail and bond, and it can get to a point where it can actually, release you even on your own recognitions. Yes. I was looking for a slightly, but I can see
Exculpatory no, but policies, yes.
Yeah. So there, all that is it working very well? Sometimes it does not. Because you can never quite get a perfect way of handling it. But what it requires is so much of sensitivity on the part of the court and sensitivity on the part of the police. But also, there are so many other policies that people have come up with, diversion policy, AJS, in terms of alternative dispute justice systems, so that it should not always be that every minor case should be ending up in court.
When you're arrested, where does the alternate dispute resolution, or where does it come in? I'm simply saying that there's a certain power imbalance when it comes to issues that we refer to as criminal, where the power is predominantly in the hands of those who can arrest you and those who investigate.
The accuser has more power.
Yes, and I'm saying this individual here, who the Constitution tells, informs that they're innocent until proven guilty. It's like they're guilty until proven innocent, really.
No, not quite, because there are so many safeguards to ensure that
That you remain innocent.
that does not happen. But the reality of it, as you are saying, is that in this game, the cops have a higher advantage.
Okay.
And that is the nature, because this is the state.
Okay.
It has the resources that not every ordinary individual has.
Okay. Part two of my question.
Yes.
There have been institutions that on paper offer free legal service. It's what they do. How does that system work? My concern here is that we have jails and prisons and remand full of people whom, as you say correctly, probably ought not to be there. We've established many of them cannot afford lawyers. What about these services that are offered by these institutions? Do they actually work? Because if they work, then why do we still have these large numbers of people who are incarcerated and probably should not be incarcerated?
They do work, but you see, they are sort of like civil society sponsored. For example, as a law society, we have a pro bono scheme, but we cannot take on all the cases that are deserving of pro bono services.
Why not?
Because, assume I have 20 or 30 of those cases, and they are not paying. I am offering free legal service. Where do I get my
Free to the person whom you're representing.
Yes.
Is there a system by which
Now
you can be?
that is
Okay.
that is what I was coming to.
Yes.
The person that has failed here is the government, because the constitution has placed an obligation on the government to ensure that it is able to provide those who cannot afford legal services a lawyer. There is the Legal Aid Act that has been passed by Parliament. It's been several years before it has been implemented because it has not been allocated the resources. So if you look at it in terms of priority, the government has not prioritized
the right of the hustler.
the right of so-called hustlers. It's even worse. For example, when you go to children in conflict with the law, it's even worse. How many remand homes do you know? I think we have one, if I'm not wrong, perhaps two postal institutions in this country. And there are a lot of children who are in conflict with the law. Where do you put them? Until just the other day when civil society started making noise, you would find that, and in certain places it still happens, you would find that children are being held with adults when they are in cells. So the government, when it comes to the question of rule of law in terms of how the police are resourced, they are adequately underfunded. Measures that are supposed to ensure that no innocent person goes to jail are adequately under resourced. So that is the challenge that we have in town.
What can you do as a law society of Kenya?
Scale. We've been, of course, lobbying for an increase in those resources. We also are trying to look for, as a society, for partners who can be able to, work with us and give us the resources that we would then be able to establish and run proper legal aid schemes, and that is something that is an ongoing discussion with several donors. So but also the government really has to take responsibility. There is a scheme that is run by the judiciary for murder suspects, because then murder was deemed to be the most heinous crime, and it has a pro bono scheme for. But the judiciary hardly has money to pay. So you have lawyers who are taking a small token, just to be able to have fuel when you're going to court and that sort of thing. But even that is not being provided.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
You sit in, remind me the name of this committee that brings together all the players in the justice system.
NCAJ.
Yes, the National Council for the Administration of Justice. You as the president of LSK are there. The Chief Justice is there. The DPP is there. The DCI, of course, the Commissioner of Prisons and all the others. Do you discuss this particular issue? For example, have you talked about those people who are incarcerated, those people who need legal aid? There's a law in place. It's not been operationalized. Have you discussed it? And how best you can make sure that this is operationalized?
Yeah, those are ongoing discussions. Actually, the last time we had a meeting, we agreed that we need to decongest the prisons. We looked at those numbers in terms of what then they mean, and we have agreed with the judiciary that certain measures ought to be taken. Among them, the power of the court to review some of those sentences and adjust them accordingly in light of the circumstances that they will be getting, the reports that they will be getting from the prisons. So that is something that is ongoing. I think the other issue that we need to do is to also talk to the magistrates again, to raise their level of awareness so that they can begin to appreciate that some of these things, just being mechanical in terms of I have sent somebody to jail, whereas there are various other forms of handling sentencing, because we have a guideline on sentencing. It shouldn't be the default. Someone has come drunk and disorderly,
Jail.
pay a fine of 10,000. If you can't pay, 2 months or 3 months in prison, because some of them, that 10,000, when you're telling them to pay, they're like, you know what? I'd rather go and eat free government food for the whatever, and we have to give credit to those who've carried out reforms in our prisons. Some of these prisons, for someone whose life is probably not so well, they can go
They will
there.
not afford 10,000.
Yeah, they can't afford.
Anyway.
So they decide, you know what, free food and whatever is not like I'm gainfully employed or whatever. I'll come out and I'll still continue with my life. But what happens is that sometimes then when they go in, then they get converted and they come out, instead of being reformed, then they
get deeper.
They get deeper into crime because of having gone to jail. And in the process, met people who have now told them, you know what, you've only come here for 2 months because of this. No, you can do better.
You can be making 10K in a day.
But does that not point to something that is infinitely nefarious in that this system that is supposed to be corrective in nature is actually an incubation hub for criminals? So it's like the justice system is trying to reduce what they consider an ill, and yet by their very action, what they're doing is they're promoting it, they're enhancing it, they're growing it. Because somebody who was, as you say, caught loitering, goes to prison, goes to jail. The product that comes out of that particular institution is very different from the product that went in, and the numbers keep increasing. And then we marvel as to why it is there are so many cases of young people who seem to be getting into crime.
Indeed. That you can actually say that that's an absolute certainty in terms of what is happening, and it also changes the narrative of what a prison is supposed to be. Instead of it being a place for a reform and restoration, then it becomes actually sort of, like a criminal academy.
So, just looking back at this case with the DPP, we then saw no sooner than had he, withdrawn the cases, then at least one case he said, look, it's being reinstituted. So what does this mean exactly? Going back into court, it will stand trial after 5 years. What happens now with this? And then what does it mean on the face of it? How does it then look, for the office of the DPP to be able to then institute, retract, and then reinstitute? What does this mean?
I assume we probably are talking about the case for the governor of Samburu.
Yes.
Because my understanding is that they had made an application. They gave reasons. It looks like the court was also not extremely comfortable
With letting it go.
And the reasons that were being advanced. And because of that, then they, withdrew sort of the application to proceed to withdraw the charges. Withdraw. So, then the case will have to proceed to its logical end. And I think even some of the other cases that...
But as it
But
proceeds,
what could have changed?
Yeah.
And I think that's the
if
crux
the
of matter.
DPP is only withdrawing because the court does not seem convinced that for the reason that you wanted to withdraw in the first place, that means the DPP is not confident
He's not sure of his case.
that he can secure a conviction in the case. Are you seeing a possibility of then this DPP going back and getting more energy and coming and saying, all right,
I'm ready
let's
now.
secure conviction?
It's one of those things that we want to see how it pans out. as you are saying, it then really raises those questions. What are they really going to do? Are they just going to go through a ritual, and get to the end of it? But I think for me, what we would want to, and this is one thing we'll be watching keenly, is to see the conduct of the DPP after this. Of course, I'm saying that because we are still following up on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I can probably mention that he wrote to me. He wrote to the society. He requested that we have a meeting, and we'll be having a meeting today in the afternoon at around 2:30, just to have this discussion. Of course, we understand that the DPP is independent in terms of how he executes the functions of his offices, and as a law society we have no oversight over. But there's a reason why the law society also sits at NCAJ, because in terms of being the custodian of the public good, that is a statutory mandate that the law society has. So we and considering the sensitivity and the broader implications to the justice system, that this is a matter that needs to be handled with a little bit of sensitivity, but also to ensure that we get full accountability in terms of the actions that are being taken. So one of the other things is that yes, we are going to have a discussion with him, listen to his point of view, but the other thing we would also be looking at to see is if then there was insufficiency, or if there was a lack of cooperation, and you're saying that perhaps there might have been that situation where there were some loose ends that were supposed to be tied that have not been tied, and these cases have been withdrawn under Section 87A. A withdrawal under Section 87A basically means that the police can investigate that case afresh and still charge you for the offense for which they have withdrawn. So is that also something that is a possibility? So that we then get to know if then they didn't have they had evidence, but there are certain loose ends that needs to be tied up. Can there be then instructions to the investigating officer? And now noting that we have a new boss in town, we have a new sheriff in town, is that something that can be done? So that you tell them, look here, we instituted this case, and this is what happened, but there are these ends which have not been tied, but some of your investigators have not been responding to our claims. But even more damaging and something that also worries us is when you have an investigator, a senior investigator within the DPP, within the DCI, coming out to say that, I signed an affidavit saying certain things, and I didn't know what that affidavit contained because I only signed the last page
without reading.
Without reading, I was assuming that I mean, look at that kind of situation. What does it really?
I know we're coming to the end of this hour, but I have to ask this question.
You only have 5 seconds to ask, and him 5 seconds to answer.
Can we question the actual independence of the DPP's office and the strength of that independence?
Yes, we can, and we have to actually now determine whether it's actually independent or not.
After today's meeting, you'll get a sense, right, of whether it's independent or not, and then we'll ask you.
And we'll ask you to come back.
Yes, as the president of the Law Society of Kenya.
Why does that sound like a threat?
Yeah, the president of the Law Society of Kenya,
It's an invitation.
whose mandate includes public good, you'll tell us whether the office of the DPP is actually independent. Eric Theuri, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll invite you again.
I appreciate it.